rain. We're torturing the earth.
Johnny Cash, don't go near the water. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, human rights activists in Uganda are warning that the lives of gay people are in danger after a newspaper published a front-page story featuring the names and photographs of what it called Uganda's top 100 gays and lesbians, alongside a yellow banner that read, "Hang them." The article appeared earlier this month in the new Ugandan weekly newspaper Rolling Stone, which is not affiliated with the U.S. magazine by the same name. Its publication came just days after the first anniversary of the introduction to Parliament of an anti-gay bill that calls for the death penalty or life imprisonment for some homosexual acts. The proposed legislation was stalled after an international outcry, including from President Obama, who called the bill odious.
Less talked about are the ties between the anti-gay measure and the far-right evangelical movement here in the United States. The author of the bill is David Bahati, a Ugandan lawmaker who has close ties to U.S.-organized evangelical groups that operate across several African countries. The groups are members of parliamentary prayer fellowships organized by The Family, one of the most powerful Christian conservative groups in Washington, D.C. The Family, also known as the Fellowship, is so highly secretive it didn't even admit it existed until last year, when 3 political sex scandals, those of South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford, Nevada Senator John Ensign, and former Mississippi Congressmember Chip Pickering, forced it into the open. All 3 men lived at one time in the family's clubhouse on Capitol Hill, known as the C Street House. For more, we're joined by journalist and author Jeff Sharlet, author of the bestseller The Family. His new book is C Street, the Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy. He traveled to Uganda earlier this year and wrote in-depth articles on the anti-gay legislation for Harper's Magazine and The Advocate. Jeff Sharlet joins us now from Dartmouth College, where he's an assistant professor of English. Jeff, welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us about the latest in Uganda. What's happening there?
Hi, Amy. Good to be back with you. Well, this article in Rolling Stone, the Ugandan Rolling Stone, what it marks is really an escalation. We've already seen this happening in Uganda. Rolling Stone's a new paper. The big national tabloid, you might say, is called Red Pepper. And they've been publishing so-called kill lists for some time now, with names, sometimes addresses, photographs of gay people. You see also some Ugandans taking out ads in these papers to say, here's this person I don't like, a rival at work or something like this. I have secret information that he's gay. This idea of sort of formalizing the list, naming the top 100, this is a real escalation. And I think what it shows us, with what's going on in the bill right now and what's alarming, is the bill hasn't been passed. It got stalled after it was introduced in response to international pressure, but it's still there. It's in effect kind of a tiger on a leash that the regime can let off depending on its own fortunes in upcoming elections. And what I'm hearing from David Bahati, the author of the bill, with whom I remain in touch, that he is now being promised a second reading, and I think this new step in the press is a very alarming one, because it shows it moving right back to the forefront of Ugandan society.
Now, you've been documented the enormous influence of these right-wing evangelical groups here in the United States on the debate in Africa. You mentioned this one church in particular, Canyon Ridge megachurch in Nevada. Could you talk about what they've been doing?
Canyon Ridge, it's a megachurch in Las Vegas. What's interesting about it is it's not even a far-right megachurch, and there's a lot of members of Canyon Ridge who would be, I think, really outraged if they understood that their church was supporting one of the leaders of the anti-gay movement, Pastor Martin Sempa, who's also received U.S. federal dollars, PEPFAR money. He's testified before our Congress. He's held up as a champion in the fight against AIDS. His method has boiled down to kill them. The Canyon Ridge Church, there's been a lot of pressure put on it. And I should say, by the way, by some evangelical activists, as a man named Warren Throckmorton, professor at Christian College, has been leading the fight to get Canyon Ridge to be accountable for the fact that they are financing part of this campaign. But you know, even that is just one piece of this equation. You go back to David Bahati, the member of parliament who is doing this, and Minister of Ethics James Nsaba Paturo, and their connections are even a little higher up. They're with people like Senator Jim Inhofe, who's been over to visit with them and teach them, as they put it, how to manage their society according to Jesus. John Ashcroft has been over to visit them. So you see, this is kind of, this goes just from a rogue megachurch in Las Vegas, which is very important. We've got to concentrate at that, all the way to the kind of the right flank of the Republican Party.
I want to turn to a clip of the Ugandan MP David Bahati, the author of the anti-gay bill. In an interview on Vanguard on Current TV, he was asked whether he thought some U.S. evangelicals, like Rick Warren, supported his bill, but are rejecting it after international pressure.
The many friends that we have, especially the evangelicals in America, when we speak to them privately, they do support us. They encourage us, but they are in a society that is very hostile. And we appreciate that. And we have said, do what you think is right for your conscience, but at the same time, remember that we are engaged in a spiritual battle, we are engaged in a very difficult battle, and it's important that you come out clearly. But we accept that they are in a very hostile environment, because America has, some of the many leaders in America have been blackmailed by pro-gay communities. But we have support in America. There are people who support what we're engaged in. There are many, many Americans who don't accept homosexuality as a human right, who take it as sin. They know it. But how do we treat these homosexuals is a matter that all of us are disagreeing. There are those who think that we should appreciate them, be tolerant to them, but for us here we are saying, no, we shouldn't. We should call sin, sin, because we cannot rewrite the Bible.
That's Ugandan MP David Bahati, author of the anti-gay bill that he drafted just weeks after a major conference that a number of U.S. evangelicals attended. Jeff Sharlet, talk about this conference.
Well, to be honest, actually, I think too much emphasis has been on the conference. This is a guy named Scott Lively, who's a fringe character in the United States, author of a book called The Pink Swastika. He argues that the Holocaust was actually sort of a result of a gay conspiracy, as was the Rwandan genocide. He went over with a more mainstream group called Exodus, which sort of has the idea that they can cure people of homosexuality, and they had this conference back in spring of 2009. The bill did emerge after that, but I went over and I wanted to spend time with Bahati, because something about that didn't add up. The idea that this guy, who is a very sophisticated politician, when you sit down with him, you see that this guy is no fool, well-educated guy. Is he really the dupe of these kind of U.S. fringe characters? And he was pretty clear that that's not how he saw it. He appreciated the message they brought to Uganda. He said, but this is something we've been working on for a while. This is something we care about. We recognize that those guys, with their talk about the Holocaust and gay conspiracies, David Bahati thinks they sound nutty. So this is, when someone who has got genocide in the mind thinks that you're too extreme, you're really kind of far out there. So what I think is kind of important to understand is these connections are much deeper. They go back for years and years and years. It's an exchange. I mean, just to look at David Bahati, he began his political career not in Uganda, but in the United States, when first he connected with some people related to a very mainstream Christian right organization called the Family Research Council. He came to the United States and studied at the Leadership Institute, the conservative grassroots political organizing institute, where he, as he puts it, got to be on a first-name basis with people like Mitch McConnell and John Ensign he met. And then they put him in touch with the family, and he started making those connections. He had those political connections going back well before this conference. So the reason I say this is I think that progressives make a mistake when we focus too much on a fringe character like Lively, and without recognizing that there are more mainstream currents going on here, and those are the ones we have to address, because Lively is easily dismissed. U.S. senators, not so much.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about the historical roots of why Uganda has become sort of the front line in this effort to spread across Africa these draconian measures against gays and lesbians. Is there any historical basis other than a few individuals who may have traveled to the United States for whites taking root there?
Well, again, this is more than a few individuals. You go back to the beginning of the current regime, President Yoweri Museveni, which goes back to 1986. He came into power as something of a leftist. You go back and you look at the documents for the family, and they're looking at this. That we need to make sure this government does not go in the wrong ideological direction, that it remained the most Christian nation in East Africa. By their own account, they facilitated the beginning of the U.S. foreign aid relationship with Uganda, which has amounted to billions over the years. And they've been, in many ways, politicians connected with that, men like Senator Chuck Grassley, Inhofe, Ashcroft, have been the face of that foreign aid. And what's happened in Uganda is it's become this tremendous revival nation with a real sort of growth of religiosity. And, you know, frankly, that's done some wonderful things for the country. And homophobia wasn't really a part of it. This is what's so fascinating. When you go and you speak to the people talking about the bill, you say, well, how far back do you date this problem? They say, oh, this is a very deep problem, the homophobia, maybe 2003. And what's interesting there is 2003, 2004, U.S. PEPFAR money to fight AIDS starts going into Uganda. Ugandan LGBT people start encountering human rights activists and health activists from the international community who are saying homosexuality is a human right. And they start seeing themselves, frankly, in a politicized sense. They said, wait a minute, we have a right, we can stand up for it. The Americans are very quick to push back. You've got a lot of big mega churches in Kampala, the capital, that are led by Americans. And they're saying to the Ugandans, you are the new front line in this battle. I mean, just when I was in Kampala last, Pastor Lou Engo, who's a leader of the Christian right, was over there. And he said, in America, we've lost the battle. But in Uganda, this is ground zero. You cannot just save Uganda, you can save America. So there's this sort of idea that they now have this world destiny.
So, Jeff Sharlet, let's take this back to the United States. Take it back to what has become mainstream politics in the United States. Tell us more fully about the family, about C Street, and about politicians today who are making these connections.
Well, as we've discussed before, the family is the oldest, most influential Christian conservative political group in Washington, dating all the way back to 1935 when it began as an anti-labor, anti-New Deal coalition with the idea that bad economies are punishments from God for decadence, for immorality, and for our attempts to regulate the market. And you know, fast forward today and look at someone like Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina, who's emerged as the standard bearer of the Tea Party within the establishment. Also a guy who lives in the subsidized, tax-exempt church that the family operates on Capitol Hill called C Street. It's registered as a church, although it performs none of the functions of a church. And there's a great group called Clergy Voice that's actually challenging them on that, the IRS. Jim DeMint is giving us that same rhetoric, saying that the kind of laissez-faire, the radical free market fundamentalist economic policies of the Tea Party are really part of a religious great awakening. And in that, he's joined by men like Senator Tom Coburn, who lives in the C Street House, Senator Sam Brownback, who's a former resident, Senator John Thune, recently moved out of the C Street House, Senator Inhofe, as I mentioned, and even some Democrats, like in the past, he's now distanced himself, Senator Mark Pryor, the pro-war, anti-gay, anti-choice, anti-labor, anti-health care, but pro-creationism Democrat from Arkansas, who once explained to me that the family is really a bipartisan group, and he had learned the meaning of bipartisanship from the family was that Jesus didn't come to take sides, he came to take over.
And talk about how the family, how C Street, this place where Democrats and mainly Republicans have lived, came to be known. We mentioned it in the lead, but these various sex scandals.
Yeah, well, last year we had Senator John Ensign, longtime resident of the C Street House. I met him there myself, and he, facing disclosure from his best friend and senior aide, whose wife he'd had an affair with, confessed to an affair. And then Governor Mark Sanford, who at the time was a very bright presidential prospect for the Republican Party, very charismatic guy, sort of publicly redefined the Appalachian Trail when he, sort of described it as leading all the way to Argentina in the arms of